Alright everybody, welcome back, and I'm sorry it's been a couple weeks. I have been extremely busy with work. But regardless, I'm here with a plane that I have seen barely anybody talking about, just period. And that is the F-16D, also known as the Barak II. And this is a quite unique F-16 for the game, both in terms of its battle rating, because it's at 13.3 with active radar arming missiles, and it's also the only twin-seat F-16 in War Thunder right now, being found in the Israeli tech tree. This is one of the strongest planes at 13.3, although admittedly there's not many planes at 13.3, and there has to be a reason why it's lower than every other F-16 that has active radar homing missiles, right? And well, there's a couple reasons for that, but a big one is likely the flight performance. This plane is straight up the worst performing F-16 in War Thunder. Like, if you put this in a dogfight against any other F-16 in the game with equally skilled pilots, this thing is going to lose every single time. It's about 300 kilograms heavier than the F-16C that's also found in the Israeli tech tree, which puts it like about 200 kilograms lighter than the F-16C Block 50, while also having a way worse engine. So not only is your turn worse, but your acceleration is also the worst as well. At the end of the day, though, even if it is the worst performing F-16, it is still an F-16, and against most of the jets that you're fighting, it is still going to be a competent flight model, and we'll get onto that here in a little bit. The worst acceleration and climb doesn't matter as much as with the other F-16s either because of the kit that it gets. You see, unlike the other F-16s that are at 13.7 with AMRAAMs, this gets access to the Derby missile. And oh man, where do I even start with this missile? This is an Israeli export missile that is essentially a highly modified Python 4 turned into a medium-range active radar homing missile. Israel doesn't use it themselves, they use the AMRAAM instead. But at least in War Thunder, it does have a couple advantages over the AMRAAM, at least for, ARRB. I will say I prefer the AMRAAM, but I'm going to start with the positives of the Derby. So you may remember from my recent videos that the two things that are really crucial right now: how hard it can pull for a target, its high off bore sight capability, letting yourself get into the notch, and of course how fast to get to the target, the acceleration. Because the longer your missile takes to get to the target, the easier it is for them to go ahead and actually, notch and chaff it. And these are actually two areas that the Derby beats the AMRAAM in. It actually has a substantially higher delta V, and inside of about, 15 kilometers or so, it is going to beat the AMRAAM to the target basically every single time, as long as you're not going hard evasive. More on that here in a second. It also does pull harder, making it better for those high up bore sight shots. But this is when we start to get into the negatives, because even though it does pull harder, which should make it better for those high up bore sight shots, when I did some testing, you'll see on screen, I was barely getting any shots that the Derby would hit that the AMRAAM wouldn't, despite the fact that the AMRAAM clearly pulls much less. Like, don't get me wrong, the Derby is better for those high up bore sight shots, but it seems like quite a few of the time it just gives up and doesn't quite pull that last little bit that it needs. Here's an X-ray view of that miss, and you can see it was so incredibly close, but it just didn't pull. Here's another pretty egregious case of it. He just rolls and it misses. And any other active radar homing missile at top tier would have hit that, including the AMRAAM. The tracking is the biggest problem that I have with the Derby, and really I don't know what is wrong with it. I can't figure it out. There's really no rhyme or reason. It just feels like it sometimes gives up. I have no idea what causes it, but it happens relatively frequently. I think there's something wrong with the tracking. And that right there alone makes it so that I would take the AMRAAM basically every single time over the Derby, at least in ARRB, just because the small difference in the high off bore sight performance, at least as of now, does not make up for the just seemingly random failure of the missile to track. The other downside of the missile, though it's a lesser one if you ask me, is the fact that it really has no BDR presence, right? You saw me trying to do it at the beginning of the match just to show that I guess technically possible. I don't recommend doing it. Basically every single one of my games except for this one, I stayed low, below contrail high. I waited until I got to closer range and then I shot these missiles. They're good within 15 kilometers. Beyond that, the AMRAAM is way better, and almost any other radar missile is better beyond that as well. The Derby has some crazy drags. The shots that you're used to hitting with stuff like the R77-1 and the AMRAAM, this is not going to be doing. When that motor runs out, you only have a few seconds until it runs out of speed. But again, this is a 13.3 F-16. You're not at 13.7, and this Matchmaker does make quite a big difference. I was getting a lot of 12.7, 13.7 games. Of course, a good amount of 14.0s too, but in those 12.7, 13.7 games, you are seeing a lot of stuff that doesn't have active radar homing missiles. And you're still an F-16, and you have 180 countermeasures, which, by the way, are single pop now. This thing has some incredible survivability, and most of the 12.7s that you face, stuff like the MiG-29s, the Hornets, other stuff like that, you can still beat in a dogfight. Even if you are the worst performing F-16, again, you're still an F-16. And of course, there is a power gap between you and the 13.7s. Something like the F-15JM, or the Mirage 2000, or the J-10A, but it's not nearly as much as the difference between, say, a 13.0 and you. And that's in the 13.7 games. I'm not even talking about the ones where you are the highest battle rating, and you're fighting stuff like the MiG-21 Bison, plenty of stuff with only Sparrows, or even no radar missiles at all that just rely on Sidewinders. And you're in there in an F-16 with, up to 6 active radar homing missiles and 180 countermeasures. I think you're starting to see why this thing is so fun, if you ask me. The only 13.3 I can think of that even comes close to this is something like, the JF-17, but that can only carry up to 4 active radar homing missiles. It has a way worse gun, and it has less countermeasures. I think that for your average ARB game, this is going to be a much better fit. Now, the move to 13.3 happened quite a few months ago at this point. I just hadn't gotten around to covering it. And the reason why I wanted to cover it now is actually something that happened just this past update. Those of y'all who keep an eye on the changelogs may have seen it actually got a brand new weapon, along with another plane in the Israeli tech tree. The new Spice Bomb. The Spice was highly requested, and really, I don't know why it took this long to come. But essentially, up until now, some of the Israeli planes have just failed to have access to any kind of, self-homing air-to-ground weapons. For some reason, Gaijin didn't want to give them Mavericks, even though they mounted them in the US, and that is enough for, tons of other stuff. And so before this, if you wanted to have any kind of, homing weapon, you were stuck with the GBU-15, but you only get 2 of them, and they're only IR. It works, it's okay, but it's not the best. Besides that, you got an assortment of, GBUs and other stuff like that, JDAMs, just the normal stuff you'll find. They gave MAVs to the F-15I recently, but the F-16s were left behind up until now. The main draw of the Spice is, of course, the fact that it is IR homing, but it's not just IR homing. It also has access to inertial navigation and GPS as well, which are both things that you see on stuff like the Hammer, for example. Essentially what this means is that if it loses track, instead of just veering off, it's going to go in the last known location and potentially lock back onto the target after the fact. Also, unlike the GBU-15, you can also carry 4 of them. So while it is less than, the 6 of the Rafale, it does bring it up much closer to what you would have seen in other stuff. And you don't have to worry about them failing to kill like you sometimes see on Mavericks, for example. Even better yet, it is actually at 12.7, just like the F-15I, and it's a fighter, while the F-15I is a strike aircraft. If you don't know what that means, it means you can run them together in a lineup, and whenever you, say, spawn the F-15I first, it won't actually double the cost of this thing's spawn. It'll still be, around 800 spawn points or whatever it is. Also, another plus, IR-guided bombs cost less to spawn than IR-guided missiles. You don't have to work as hard to be able to spawn these. But in any case, I hope you enjoyed the video. I will catch y'all next time, and hope y'all have a great day. So, peace, y'all.